And we're going to jump in. We're doing a series that we've done at the church I used to be at in Arkansas. It's called At the Movies. There it was Journey at the Movies, and Activate at the Movies doesn't really sound very well, so we're just going to call it At the Movies here. And the idea is that Jesus, when he was living on earth and during his ministry time, Jesus told parables. He told parables, which is a story. Jesus spoke oftentimes when he would get in front of crowds, he would tell stories. And the reason that he did that is because he knew that we innately gravitate towards stories. That's why we can stand in front of a movie screen and watch these fictitious characters play out this story in front of us for 2 hours and weep like babies at the very end. Oh, that's just me? I'm the only one that does that? Okay, so we can laugh and we can enjoy their conversations and the life. See, we connect with stories. That's why when you watch the news, they bring somebody on who has a family and they have a compelling story. That's why the Olympics would be really stupid watching people swim laps back and forth if they didn't do these vignettes and a story about the swimmer or a story about the runner. And all the trials and obstacles they had to get through to get where they are and the accomplishment and achievement. See, we innately connect to stories. And Jesus spoke in stories so that we could understand them and he could bring principles. Now, the reason we're going to do, you might ask, why are we going to watch portions of movies here? And we're going to dig into that a little bit more as I go through the message today. But the reason we're going to is because the movies that we watch today are the parables of our day. The movies that we go and we watch on the silver screen or the ones that are on Netflix in our living rooms, they are the parables of today. And what I hope to do over the next 4 weeks, next week and the following weeks, is for us to train us a little bit more as we perceive culture. As we perceive the stories in culture, the news that we take in, that we would be able to filter out what is bad, filter what is good, and hold fast to that, and then redeem what is broken. We're going to talk about those things today. So I want us to have, I hope to put these goggles on us with a few different filters, and we're going to talk about those today. See, I like watching movies, and you can say that it's just a mindless thing and a brainless thing to sit and watch a movie. But I end up crying in a lot of movies because they connect to my soul. They challenge me to be a better person. They challenge me to think differently. And I want us to, as we see these movies, begin to create this filter in our minds so when we perceive the stories of our world. For me, when I'm at Costco, there's some people there who are not kind people. And if they ever come here, I'm going to feel bad. So I don't say their names or anything. But there are some people that are not very kind. And I hope that they would come here and be part of this community. But as I can either perceive that they're just a jerk, and they're mean, and they're trying to put me down, or I can begin to filter what's going on and realize there's something at the root of that. And that God has sent me into those situations and sends us as people into situations, into our own stories in life to make a difference. So as we go through the next 4 weeks and we watch these different movies, we'll do, we're hoping to do maybe an animated one or two and some other movies, and we're going to glean as much as we can and see what fits in with a godly principle and what we can get from that and apply in our lives. But before we do that, I want to fly up to about 30,000 feet and look at what we're talking about here. Look at this idea of stories and movies and culture from a distance. See, our culture, we live in it and we breathe it and we eat and we sleep it, but oftentimes I don't think we think about it or reflect it. Amanda was just talking about how our culture has changed in the last 15 years as a result of 9/11. And our lives have changed. And it happened so incrementally, we don't even know how much our lives have changed. But do you remember a day where we didn't have to take our shoes off when we got onto airplanes? When you could bring your bag right up and didn't have to get screened. We weren't worried about bombs going off or shoe bombs or somebody stabbing somebody. There weren't even cockpit doors that were locked. See, that has trickled down into our culture. And a lot of these things that happen in our life, I was just thinking about my kids. I was watching this show on Netflix. It's called Stranger Things, and it's a recap of what the 80s movies, it was this genre of what the 80s movies were like E.T. And you see kids riding around on bicycles till late at night, 7-year-old boys just, out hunting frogs or doing whatever they do. And I remember watching The Goonies when I was a kid. And I used to do that. I used to run around. We used to do those things. But now, if I let my 7-year-old run around, statistically, they're not any more likely to get abducted than I was when you look at the statistics. But in culture, our minds, because we hear about it all the time, we have made laws. I would be prosecuted if I let my 2 kids ride their bike to their school at the end of our block and they were there. If they were there playing alone, I could be prosecuted for that. You just can't let your young kids do that anymore. So our world has changed a lot just since I've been alive 25 years. That was too loud of a laugh right there. So it's a little more than 25 years. So what I want to do is take a look at culture. And some of the culture that we have is good. Some of the things in our culture are really great. We live in the United States, and there are some things that we can really celebrate. Our freedom, that is fantastic. And there are some things that are really bad. There are countries around the world that wish we wouldn't export our culture to their country because there are things that we should be shameful for, and we're not. We're a little brazen in. See, we have this dichotomy in our world between the Western values, and we have Eastern values, and the Islamic values, and we have American values or Western values. There's polarizing opposites in our culture, and we want to take a look at culture today. And what I hope to do is that we would begin to filter those things and then act upon what is right. See, in our culture, we have good and bad. Like good, we have good food. Do we have good food? Americans are fat. By any account, we're one of the fattest nations in the world. When it comes per capita, we weigh more and we eat more food than anybody else. And it's a problem because our culture has really good food. And even if your culture had bad food and brought it here, somehow we made it better, right? And we can make it in like half the time, and it's awesome. Now, I love having all the food available. That's something good. Music, we have all kinds of music here. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. We all have our own preferences. Entertainment, fashion, all of these things, they're part of our culture. And we either, we'll get into that in a second. In our lives, what we perceive as good and bad is a result of our worldview we've constructed from teaching, parents, community, and etc. And as I've said before, we're all different. We believe different things, and we're all in process. So what you think is good, I might think is bad. Like if you love baseball. I don't love baseball. People get all jacked up about baseball. Football. You love football? I don't love football. I love hockey. I'm a hockey fan, okay? If you don't like hockey, that's okay. You don't have to like hockey. It's just part of my culture and my worldview. I say it's good. You say it's bad. And that leads us to this. Culture is not all bad or all good. It just is. It just is. It's not all bad or good. It just is. And we have the responsibility to do our best with what we know. We have to do our best to know and to understand more. What is good? What should we be filtering out? What should we be applying to our lives? And what should we be pushing away and rejecting? So I want to discuss 3 filters this morning that we should apply to our lens of culture. And the first one is this, is to receive it. There are things in culture. So number 1 is receive. If you're writing it down, receive. There are things in culture we can just receive. Philippians 4:8 says this, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." So what the Bible is telling us, what Scripture is telling us, is if it's good in culture, like food, is food good? Yes, we can eat good food. Is there bad food that could make us sick? Yes. There's water in Mexico that can make you sick. So bring that through your filter, okay? So receive those things that are true and noble and good and pure and lovely and admirable. Just receive those things. See, there are things in culture that we can just receive. Technology, I know we have these 2 spectrums in culture, in Christian culture or in religious culture. There are people who will, in religious culture and in Christianity, who will reject anything that's new. So social media comes on the scene. Social media is bad. Why? And see, people would say that social media is bad. Television, you shouldn't watch television. Rock and roll music. Some of you, Elvis Presley was the devil, right? Because he moved his hips, and we shouldn't see that. And the TV stations that would show him dancing would only show him from the stomach to his head. They wouldn't show his hips moving because that was bad. That was deemed wrong in culture. See, there are things like television, who some would say we shouldn't watch television because it's bad. Are there bad things on television that we probably should not be watching? The answer is let's all nod our heads. There are some despicable things that go on television. Are there really good things? Yes, there are really good things. As a matter of fact, the gospel message is broadcast to nations all over the world via the technology of television and satellite and radio airwaves. Radio isn't necessarily bad. It's what we do with it. Email and internet. The internet, are there bad things on the internet? Everybody nods your head, yes. Anything you could find it on the internet. It doesn't make the internet bad because we stream these messages over the internet. We use the technology of the internet to use it for what is good. So there are things that we can just receive. We can receive technology. We can just receive music that is wholesome, and we can enjoy that, and we can exploit that. I don't want to take too much time on these first two because it's the third one that I really want to camp on today. But you guys realize there's a filter that we should filter everything by. And we should say, the question is that good for me? Is that good for me? Is this something that is pure and noble and lovely, that is going to edify my life and the people around me? And should I be receiving this? Or is it bad? And that leads us to the second one. So first one, we can what? We can receive. Secondly, it's another R, we can reject. We can reject those things. Oh, I skipped a whole good, that's all right. It's going to make this shorter. I'll plug it in later. We can reject those things. There are things, there's the other side of the coin, these things that we can reject. See, there are no such things, when you talk about Christianity, there are things that happen in the world that are just bad. They just are child abuse. It's never a good thing. None of us would ever raise our hands and say child abuse is ever a good thing. Adultery. It's never a good, there's no such thing as Christian adultery. There's not a place where we can say, you know what, we're going to camp out here. I'm a follower of Christ, and God is pleased with me cheating on my spouse. That is never, ever going to happen. It's not. Fornication, just sleeping around with anybody. It's not a good thing. It's something that we should reject. Drunkenness. Now, whether you believe it's okay to drink alcohol or to not drink alcohol, that's open to interpretation because it's interpreted both ways from Scripture. But the Scripture is very clear on drunkenness. It says you cannot be drunk. Do not be drunk. So that's a whole other subject we'll get into later. Is it wise for us to drink when drinking leads to drunkenness? So that is another question. There's no such thing as Christian drunkenness. There's no such thing as Christian or good pornography. You just shouldn't be involved in pornography. Watching it, making it, distributing it over the internet, it shouldn't be. These are things that we can all reject. Illegal drug use or legal drug use that has gone too far. It's not a good thing to put toxins and drugs into our bodies. It's not good for us. So number one, we can receive and we can also reject culture. There are things in culture that we can reject, and there are things in culture that we should reject. We should just say, you know what, those have no part in my life. Gossip, it's never good. It's never, ever good. And that's a hard one. Drunkenness, fornication. I'm not doing any of those. Gossip. Oh, my gosh. I did it already this week. I did it. We have someone who's not kind at our work, and this person, I'm not going to say whether it's okay, she goes around and she picks on some of the employees she's just a nitpicker. She just nitpicks everything. And the way that some of the guys that we were talking about it, we would just go by and say what she says to them as a way of coping with it. Say, oh, it looks like you haven't touched that in a week. Just the absurd side of it. Oh, are you even working today? Are you even working at all? Because there's some absurdity there. And I caught myself getting into that, and I go, that's not edifying. I can't help this woman in that way. I'm not making these people feel any better about this woman who does this. I'm not making myself feel any better about it. I mean, I feel good at the moment. It feels good. Gossip feels good when you do it. But it's not healthy, and it's not good for our lives, and it's not good for anything. So gossip is not something that we should be a part of. Does gossip happen in our world and in our culture? Like everywhere. I mean, 90% of the stuff that you see on social media is a story of what really happened about the story. Right? With everybody's interpretation heaped on top of it. All the ads that are on the internet. Hey, guess who got such and such done? And you click on it and it's like, that didn't really happen. That was just to get me to click on it so they can make ad revenue for me clicking on it and take me to this stupid page where they're trying to sell me, I don't know, whatever it is. Who knows what it is. So there are things in culture that we should receive. There are things in culture that we should what? Reject. Just completely reject them. See, these things may seem like stupid, arbitrary rules. They might. Man, it's okay. I don't get in fights when I get drunk. I don't do those things I don't fornicate when I am under illegal substances. I don't do those things that are bad. But see, God has given us these rules because the Bible tells us that God made us in His image, and God knows how we are uniquely made and how we're uniquely wired. God knows what is good and healthy for us, just like I know as a parent what is good and healthy for my kids. My kids want to eat Oreo cookies and sweet things all the time, and they want to reject the proteins and then the carbs and the fruit and all the vegetable, not the fruit, they eat fruit like no other, but they don't want to eat the vegetables, but I know it's right for them. And they could think that those are arbitrary rules. Dad, why would you make me eat those? They don't taste good and I don't like them. Right? So we think, God, why would you make these arbitrary rules that I have to follow? Why shouldn't I be drunk? Why shouldn't I do illegal drugs? Why shouldn't I sleep with every person on the planet? Why shouldn't? It's fun. Right? That could be our argument. But God is saying, as our loving Father, because those things aren't good for you, son. Those things aren't good for you, daughter. It's not edifying for your body. It doesn't grow your soul. It doesn't grow the image of who I am, hope and mercy and grace and love and all those things in your life. So that's why God says stay away from those things, to reject them. It's not so we can't have fun. I have a lot of fun, and I don't do those things. I think, the Bible says that Jesus said, I've come to give you life and life more abundantly. See, I can experience all the phenomenal things in this world. I can experience it under the covering of God's grace and mercy and protection and love, and yet I can experience something that people who do all of those things that I shouldn't be doing, I can experience something even better, knowing that I'm connected and tapped into the God of the universe, and He speaks to my life, uses my life to impact other people, that brings me so much joy that they just don't get to experience. See, Jesus said, what you think of as life is actually death. Those things that you experience. Just take any rock and roll star. Solomon said it. King Solomon said, I've experienced everything underneath the sun, and it doesn't satisfy. Any rock star, just watch people just on the incline. Man, they're at the top making all the money, doing all things, crazy parties, travel everywhere. And what happens to their lives? What happens to their lives? See, God is putting this rejection of that part of culture in our lives because He says it's not good for you. He's not saying I don't want you to have good things. He says I have all kinds of great things planned for you. But you got to reject these things because they're false. They don't actually give you what you think they're going to give you. It's a payday that never comes. It's an IOU. It's a check always waiting to be cashed. It never pays off. See, God the designer knows how he wired the universe and how he wired us to be fulfilled, and that's why he asks us to live a life like he asks us to live us. Great joy in sharing with others and caring for other people. So the last one, receive, reject, and the last one is redeem. And this is the one that just gets me right here. The one where I feel a unique connection with God, because I know that he's out there. I know that he loves me, but there are 6 billion, 7 billion people on the planet. So how much could God really love me and really care about me when there's 6 billion? I couldn't even count to 6 billion. And he's got to love all of us, right? So how much I got 3 kids. If I have 1 kid, I can really, really love that kid. If I have 3 kids, I could really, really love them, but less than if I just had 1 kid. It's the same type of love, but it's got to be spread across 3. But if I had 6 billion kids, I wouldn't even know all their names, But our God, in this redemption process, this is the part I love so much. Our God uses our lives in ways that we can see that he is working in our lives. So we know that we're special to him because he said, I have plans for you to prosper you and not to harm you, give you a hope and a future. There are things I laid out before the beginning of time for you to do, works for you to do, that you would help me in building this kingdom so that people would experience joy in their life instead of sadness, instead of brokenness, that they would experience mercy instead of guilt, instead of shame. And I want to use you as my agents to help people see how much of a loving God I am. There's this idea of redemption, receive culture, reject culture, but the one I'm so jacked up about, and the reason that I wanted to plant this church, and the reason I believe God's kingdom needs to come, is because we get to be agents that redeem culture. Our culture, there's a lot of bad in our culture, but we get to redeem it. This is where many Christians lose traction, and quite honestly, this is likely the most important one. It's easy to say, you know what, I'm not going to do those things. I just won't do those. I'm not going to be a pornographer, an adulterer, a fornicator, a drunk. I'm not going to do those things. And I'm going to do these good things. But when it comes to redeeming, this is where a lot of us lose traction. And this is where we experience God so much, is in the redemption process as he redeems our lives as we go on mission with him to help redeem others. There's this valley outside of, this is really cool. There's this valley outside of Jerusalem. It's called the Hinnom Valley. And it's a very significant place because King Manasseh, he was the son of King Hezekiah. Hezekiah was known to be a follower of God. When you go through the kings of Israel, it'll say this is the king and he lived for so many years. It talks about whether he was good and was right in the sight of the Lord and whether he followed the Lord. And many of them did and more of them didn't. More of them brought back in the idols, and they started worshiping false gods, and there's this back and forth, the ebb and flow, and Hezekiah was a king, and he was a good king, and he followed God, and he had a son, and his son Manasseh was not a good king. And Manasseh ran in the very opposite direction. When he became king, I think he was in his teens, he became king, and he resurrected the idols of the past, and he built up the towers to many of the other gods of the Assyrians and the countries around them. And he ran very far from God. It says this, and in this valley, the Hinnom Valley, we're going to talk about it here. The Bible describes it. I'm going to read it. In 2 Chronicles 33, 1-6, it said, Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 55 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the detestable practices of the nations of the Lord that the nations of the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He rebuilt the high places his father Hezekiah had demolished. He also erected altars to Baal and Asherah poles. He bowed down to all the starry hosts and worshipped them. He built altars in the temple of the Lord, of which the Lord had said, my name will remain in Jerusalem forever. In both courts of the temple, the Lord, he built altars to all the starry hosts. He sacrificed children in the fire of the valley of Ben Hinnom, practiced divination and witchcraft, sought omens and consulted mediums and spiritualists. He did much evil in the eyes of the Lord, arousing his anger. So we had a righteous king, and then we have his son who, for unknown reasons, it's not described, runs in the completely opposite direction. See, this valley was also the place where Judas, one of Jesus' apostles, hanged himself outside of Jerusalem. So there was utter destruction in this valley. There was all kinds of terrible things that happened. It was a dreadful place. Aren't there places like that in our world? Aren't there places like that where utter destruction? We go to Vegas every once in a while. There's a wedding there or something, and it, on the outside, on the surface, it's glitz and glamour and good food and just amazing. But then you start riding in the cabs and you start feeling the oppression in people's lives of what they've given their life to. What they've given their lives over to, the things they never thought that they would do, and the cab drivers that hear all these stories. And every time I ride in a shuttle there, if I'm flying in for a conference or something like that, I just ask, hey, what? And they tell these stories, and it's just the litany of stories of lives that are broken. And there are places in our own families and in our own lives, in our workplace that are just broken. They're not right. They're not good. See, there's dreadful places in our own life, places we would rather avoid than take the light of God, than take his light and to shine at Costco for me. See, today when we look at the Hinnom Valley, though, it looks far different from the time of Manasseh. Today, the valley hosts musical concerts and offers a park of lush green atmosphere for grassy areas for kids where they play and frisbees and they play in the park and they do all these great things. It's become a cultural place where life is happening again. How ironic, in times past, children were killed there, sacrificed there to gods who do not even exist. And now kids are thriving there and playing in parks and experiencing life there. It's almost as though the Hinnom Valley has been redeemed from the horrific acts of idol worship and child sacrifice, just like Manasseh was redeemed. See, what happened with Manasseh is as he got more and more into idol worship, the Bible tells us that God allowed the Assyrians, a neighboring country, to capture him. And it says they actually put a hook in his nose and dragged him around. And like a bull will get a ring in their nose so you can drag them around, because if you've ever been bopped on the nose or pinched it or something right there, it hurts really bad and you don't want to move. It's a way to control and to get him to submit. And they had Manasseh, they put a ring in his nose and dragged him around. And in that time of submission, when he was physically submitted by the Assyrians, God began to speak to his heart. And in this time, see, God tamed him. He humbled himself in the sight of God, and he had a heart change. You see, there are people like us who are sent in to the world to redeem places, your workplace, your neighborhood, your family. It's easy to just say, what, that's broken, I want to stay away from it, right? It's very easy just to reject it. You know what, I don't like being there because I don't feel good, and it's not a good place to be. I talk to many of us as they call me during the week and say, man, I just want a different job where things are good. And I said, look, there's no perfect place on this place called earth, because there's a bunch of broken, imperfect people. And it's not our job to reject culture and stay away from all of it. It's our job to be sent into it, that we might redeem it. So I see myself as an ambassador at Costco. The reason I'm there is to take what the world puts at me and let it roll off of my back like a duck does water, and to say, you know what, I'm bringing light and salt into this place. I am going to be the one who changes people's hearts and minds because the power of God lives in me. I'm going to love people when they reject me. I'm going to serve them. I'm going to do my best. The ones that push me away and the ones that poop on me, the ones that try to keep me down, the ones that make me do things and then say things about me, those are the ones that I'm going to go after, because those are the ones who desperately need the love of Jesus Christ. See, it's our job to redeem culture. There's a man named William Wilberforce and there's a movie called Amazing Grace. I think it's on Netflix, or it was on Netflix. William Wilberforce lived in Britain. And many years ago, when the slave trade was just at its peak, in its prime, and they were bringing slaves from Africa into Europe, and they were using them for everything. And he was a Christian man. And he said, you know what, this is wrong. This is not right. And that man stood up. I watched that movie. I wept because there was one man who was in Parliament, and he was rejected by all of his peers. But he stood for what was right. And you know, that single man, over the course of years, ended the complete slave trade in Britain on his own. See, we are sent in as ambassadors of Christ to go into dark places, to change them and redeem culture where it's broken. See, what are some areas we can redeem? See, social media. There's a lot of garbage on social media, but we get to be on social media, and we get to celebrate the love of Christ. We get to put up pictures of how we got to serve last week, people, and go into dark places and show them God's love in tangible ways. In our workplaces, in our families. Guess what? Our families are jacked up. You know, we have messed up people in our families, and I'm one of them. I'm one of the jacked up people in our family. But we go into our families with the love of Christ to show acceptance. And to show God's mercy and love and forgiveness time and time again. Why? That we might redeem. We just can't just reject it. It happens all the time. Hey, I don't like my wife anymore, so I leave her. I don't like my kids anymore, so I reject them. I don't like my family anymore, so I reject them. And that's not what God calls us to be. He says, go in there, be persecuted for righteousness' sake, and show my love so that it might be redeemed. That is how God's kingdom comes and how God's will is done on earth as it is in heaven. Family relationships, music. We've got, I'm going to go back to this. I love this. We've got Mandy. She's not here this morning, but she came to us. They've served with us many times, and she came and she says, you know what? I've noticed on Facebook that you don't have much of a Facebook presence. And I said, welcome to Activate Church. We can't do everything. We do the few things that we can, and we pray that God brings people in who have a passion about doing new things. And we believe that's what she says, I want to take over that. I said, fantastic. I want you to take over that. And she began posting things, and she began doing this. And there's this verse in 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23. It's one of my favorites. It says this. It's Paul talking, and he says this, though I am free, I belong to no one. I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. I've made myself a slave. So when I'm at work, I see myself as a slave to my boss, even, or people around, whoever is there. And not that I'm a slave, but that I'm going to serve them, and I'm going to do it with a smile, because that's what shows God's love. He said, to the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. And to those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law. He's not talking about the law of the land, but the law of the Old Testament. He said, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law. Though I am not free from God's law, but I am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. See, what's Paul saying? He says, I realize that I've been sent by an all-loving God who left heaven to come and redeem what we had broken. And he said, I am Christ's ambassador. We go to the Lighthouse occasionally and we serve food there, and I love the sign they have on the wall next to the bathrooms. It says, God has no hands or feet but mine. See, we are God's hands and feet and mouth. We speak life. We give life. Our feet take us to places where we go, where other people don't want to go. We go to Royal Family Kids Camp. Why? So that we can speak life into kids' lives who don't have families, who are broken, that we might redeem them. Okay? That's how we bring God's love in dark places. We are ambassadors of redemption. That's what God calls us to. You see, 9/11 happened 15 years ago today. And there are people who said, let's build a wall, let's build a bubble and nuclear missiles, and let's just take ourselves out of the rest of this God-forsaken, awful world, and let's get all the people out who would like to do harm to us, and let's just keep ourselves in a vacuum and in a bubble. And as believers, that should not be a position that we hold. We should say, you know what, I'm willing to go wherever you would call me, God, whether it's my workplace, my family, overseas. Muslims are not the enemy. Terrorists are not the enemy. Satan is the enemy of our soul, and he wreaks havoc on people's lives, and it takes people like us who would go and say, you know what, I'll love as far as God takes me. See, 9/11 happened. It's not the worst atrocity, but it affected our world very, very deeply. It changed our culture, and I think for the worse. I think it brought us back into this defensive, fearful place where we would say, you know what, I'm not going to engage people because I don't know if they're trying to scheme about my demise. And see, that's so against the gospel. Paul went to so many places where he was beaten, tortured, and put in prison for the cause of Christ because he said, I become all things to all men that I might win some. And that should be the banner over our lives. That should be everything that we're about. So I want to pray about 3 things this morning. I want to pray for our families. I want to pray for the families who lost loved ones on 9/11 15 years ago. I want to pray for our culture that has shifted to make us more introverted and less extroverted. I want to pray for the restoration of our Muslim brothers and sisters' culture of people who would incubate ideas that bring turmoil upon others. See, that restoration needs to happen over there and here. So would you guys bow your heads? Heavenly Father, thank you for involving us in your plan. Thank you for bringing us to a place where we can hear truth. And let us filter everything that comes in through these lenses, our eyes, God. Let us filter those things in a way that you would filter them, that would send us out into difficult places, into difficult situations, that we might help bring your kingdom come and your will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. God, I pray for all the families that lost family, dads and moms and sisters and brothers. I pray for the Muslims who they're proud to lose their suicide bombers and family, but it's just a broken cultural worldview that allows them to keep their emotions aside from losing that precious member of their family. God, I pray that we would be a church who would speak to both sides and bring redemption on both sides. I pray that your kingdom would come and the people who are far from you, that there would be a cultural revolution as believers like these people here and like your church. We would stand up for what is right and what is good and what is pure and what is holy. And who would say that is not right, and we're going there and we're going to make a difference. I pray that you would continually use us and you would not lift your hand from us, but that you would use us as instruments to bring peace and joy and love and mercy and kindness to a very broken and dark world. We ask these things in your precious name. Amen.